I was standing right there when my son started laughing about my death. Before I go any further, please subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This isn't a story about screaming or confrontation. There's no dramatic argument in the driveway, no doors slammed, no raised voices. This is a story about the moment a mother realizes she has already been erased, quietly, politely, and without her consent. I didn't understand it at first. I don't think anyone ever does. When betrayal comes softly, wrapped in familiarity, the mind tries to protect itself. It looks for another explanation. A misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context. Anything that allows the world to stay recognizable. But once you hear something like that, once you hear your own child speak about your death as if it's overdue, the world doesn't quite fit the same way again. I'm a mother. I spent most of my adult life believing that if you gave everything you had to your children, your time, your patience, your body, your future, then one day, when you were older, you would at least be safe with them. Not adored. Not celebrated, just safe. I didn't expect gratitude. Mothers learn early not to expect that. What I expected was respect, consideration, the basic dignity of being seen as a person, not a problem. I raised my son in a modest home. Nothing special to anyone else, but to me it was everything. It was the place where his height was measured against the wall, where scraped knees were cleaned at the kitchen sink, where homework was spread across the table late at night. It wasn't fancy, but it was stable, predictable, full of routines that feel invisible when you're young, the kind you don't appreciate until you lose them. My husband and I worked hard. We weren't wealthy, but we were careful, responsible. We believed in paying bills on time, in saving what little we could, in doing things the right way even when no one was watching. When my husband passed away, the house changed immediately. Not physically. Emotionally, silence has a sound, and once you hear it, you can't forget it. I tried to manage on my own. I really did. I kept the house clean. I cooked for myself. I stayed busy. I told myself independence mattered. That relying on your children too much only made things harder in the end. But my son started visiting more often. Checking in. Asking questions about my day. He seemed concerned. Attentive, he suggested that I spend more time near him and his family. "It'll be easier," he said, "for all of us." I remember hesitating, not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't want to become something that needed managing. I didn't want to be the reason someone sighed quietly when plans were made. But he insisted. He said it would give him peace of mind. He said it was what families do. I believed him. At first, everything felt fine. Comfortable, even. I told myself I was lucky. Many people my age don't have children who care enough to check in at all. I reminded myself of that whenever I felt out of place. I helped where I could, watched the children, folded laundry without being asked, cooked meals when it seemed helpful. I learned quickly how to make myself small without disappearing completely. I didn't want to be a burden. That word finds you eventually, whether you invite it or not. It settles quietly in your chest and starts shaping your behavior. I ignored small signs that something wasn't right. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room. The way decisions were explained to me after they'd already been made. At the time, I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself younger families move faster, think differently. I told myself this was just how things were now. I wanted to believe that. Looking back, that was my first mistake. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. It wasn't planned. An appointment ended sooner than I thought it would. I remember feeling relieved, pleased, even that I'd get a quiet moment before the evening routine started. I let myself in the way I always had. No announcement, no knocking. I had never needed to before. I could hear voices outside. In the backyard, laughter, real laughter. The kind that comes easily when people believe they're among their own. I wasn't trying to listen. I wasn't suspicious. I didn't stop to eavesdrop. I was just there. Then I heard my son's voice. He was laughing, not the polite kind, not awkward or forced. He was genuinely amused. At first, my mind didn't register the words. It took a moment for them to settle, for their meaning to push past disbelief. He was talking about my death, not with sadness, not with discomfort, but casually, like it was a detail that should have already resolved itself. There was another voice, someone agreeing, adding to it, a comment made lightly, without hesitation, as if they were discussing a late delivery or an inconvenience that hadn't been handled yet. I remember standing very still. I remember noticing the temperature of the air, the sound of my own breathing, shallow and careful. I remember thinking, so this is what it sounds like when you stop being a person. I didn't walk toward them. I didn't interrupt. I didn't make a sound. I turned around and walked back the way I'd come, my movements slow, controlled, almost careful not to disturb the moment they were enjoying. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Not yet. Anger takes time. What I felt was confusion, layered with a kind of grief that didn't have a name yet. I replayed the moment over and over, trying to find a version of it that hurt less. Trying to adjust the tone in my memory. Trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. They never do. Over the next few days, everything looked the same, but it felt different. Like I'd stepped behind a curtain and could suddenly see the stage from another angle. I started paying attention. I noticed how often my son spoke about me instead of to me. How plans were discussed, as if I were an object that needed to be moved, not a person with opinions. I noticed how often I was reassured not to worry, without ever being told what I wasn't supposed to worry about. There were documents I was told were just paperwork. There were conversations that happened in lowered voices. There were smiles that didn't reach my eyes. I realized something slowly, painfully. They weren't planning with me. They were planning around me. What I had overheard wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a joke that went too far. It was a truth that had been rehearsed in private, spoken comfortably, without fear of consequence. I had a problem with the expiration date. I didn't confront my son, not because I was afraid, but because I needed to understand. I needed to see the full shape of what I was dealing with before I decided how to respond. There's a kind of clarity that comes when you stop expecting kindness. When you stop assuming the best, it's painful but it's honest. I watched quietly. I listened carefully. And the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. I wasn't being cared for. I was being managed. Every interaction was measured. Every decision is framed as concern. Every reassurance delivered with a smile that felt practiced. By the end of that week, I understood something that took me decades to learn. Love can exist and still be conditional. And when the conditions change, so does the way people talk about you when they think you can't hear. I wish I could tell you that was the worst part. It wasn't, because what I discovered next wasn't just about words. It was about plans. Plans that had already been set in motion. And by the time I realized what was happening, I understood something else as well. I was running out of time. Once you realize you are being managed instead of loved, something inside you changes. Not loudly, not all at once. It's quieter than that, like a switch being flipped in a room you didn't even realize was dark. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't reveal what I had heard. Instead, I watched. There's a strange advantage to being underestimated. When people think you're unaware, they stop hiding things very well. They speak freely. They explain just enough to feel reasonable, not enough to be honest. I started noticing patterns. Appointments scheduled for me, not with me. Conversations that ended with, "It's already taken care of." Papers placed in front of me with reassuring smiles and vague explanations. Just something routine. Nothing you need to worry about. "It's easier this way." That phrase came up often. Easier this way, easier for whom was never discussed. I began asking quiet questions, not directly to my son, but to the world around him. Clerks, receptionists, people whose job it was to answer without emotion. And little by little, pieces started falling into place. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, a name mentioned casually, a document copied instead of handed over, a signature I didn't remember giving. I learned that decisions had been made about my belongings, about my living arrangements, about my future. All without me. I discovered that my house, the one my husband and I had worked for, lived in, protected, had already been discussed as if it were no longer mine. Not in anger, not in conflict, but practically, strategically. Like an asset waiting to be processed. The most unsettling part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how calmly it was handled. How justified it sounded when explained to others. "She's old. She doesn't really need all that space. She won't understand anyway." That last one stayed with me. I realized then that I wasn't seen as capable of understanding my own life. My age had quietly disqualified me from having agency, And that is a dangerous place to be. I didn't confront my son. I didn't argue. I didn't demand explanations. Because confrontation would have warned him. It would have pushed everything further underground. Instead, I did something far more effective. I became very careful. I gathered information. Slowly, quietly, I asked for copies. I requested explanations in writing. I took notes. I paid attention to dates, names, and signatures, and then I spoke to someone outside the family. That was the hardest step, not because it was complicated, but because it meant admitting the truth to myself. It meant saying out loud that my own child might not have my best interests at heart. That's a sentence no mother wants to form. The person I spoke to didn't react emotionally. They didn't gasp or shake their heads. They simply listened. Then they asked me questions my family never had. Did I understand what I had signed? Was I pressured? Had I been given independent advice? For the first time in a long while, someone spoke to me like I was capable, like my voice mattered. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't powerless. I had just been treated that way. What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no courtroom scenes, no raised voices. Just a series of very calm, very firm steps. Paperwork was reviewed. Decisions were paused. Boundaries were drawn. And slowly, the plans that had been made without me began to unravel. When my son realized that I understood what was happening, his tone changed. Concern turned into frustration. Reassurance turned into defensiveness. He asked why I hadn't trusted him. He said he was only trying to help. He said I was overreacting. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I simply told him that I was taking control of my own affairs. That sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Because control is only a problem when someone else expects to have it. The atmosphere shifted after that. Conversations became shorter. Visits became less frequent. The warmth I'd once believed in faded quickly once it was no longer useful. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed the help, but because it confirmed what I had suspected all along. The love had conditions. I made arrangements to live independently again. Not in anger, not in defiance, but in self-respect. I downsized, I simplified. I chose peace over proximity. The day I moved out, no one tried to stop me. That silence said everything. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. Not happy, not yet, but clear. I slept better, I thought more clearly. I no longer felt like I was waiting for permission to exist. I began rebuilding my life in small ways, choosing my own routines, making my own decisions, remembering who I was before I became someone to manage. And then, slowly, the calls started coming. Confusion, regret, concern. Not all of it was sincere, but some of it was. My son asked why things had gone so far. He said he didn't mean for it to happen the way it did. He said he thought he was doing what was best. I listened. And then I said something I'd never said before. I am not something to be handled. There was a long pause after that. I don't know what our relationship will look like in the future. I don't know if trust can be rebuilt once it's been quietly dismantled. What I do know is this. I am no longer waiting to be valued. I am no longer shrinking myself to make others comfortable. And I am no longer silent when decisions are made about my life. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever felt managed instead of loved, overlooked instead of respected, please hear me when I say this. It's not too late. Not to speak. Not to choose yourself. Not to reclaim what was always yours. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight. It's to stand up quietly and walk away with your dignity intact. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. You're not alone.